The screams echoed through the marble-tiled bathroom of Riverside Preparatory Academy as three girls forced Maya Chun's head under the rushing water of the ornate sink. What they didn't know was that they had just made the worst mistake of their entitled lives. The quiet scholarship student they thought was helpless had been holding back something that would change everything in the next 60 seconds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chun adjusted the strap of her threadbare backpack as she navigated the pristine hallways of Riverside Preparatory Academy, her worn canvas sneakers silent against the polished marble floors. At 17, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with straight black hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and clothes that clearly came from discount stores rather than the boutiques her classmates frequented. Dark shadows under her eyes spoke of early morning shifts at the local diner where she worked weekends to help her mother cover their cramped apartment's rent. The other students at Riverside Prep moved through the halls with the easy confidence that came from generations of wealth and privilege. Their designer uniforms, luxury cars in the parking lot, and casual discussions about ski trips to Aspen served as constant reminders that Maya existed in their world by permission only. She was the scholarship kid, the charity case who had earned her spot through academic excellence when her previous public school had lost funding. Every day felt like walking through a museum where she was simultaneously the observer and the exhibit. Maya clutched her chemistry textbook closer to her chest as she made her way toward her locker, trying to blend into the background among clusters of laughing teenagers. In her wallet, tucked behind her student ID, was a $20 bill that represented her entire lunch budget for 2 weeks. Her mother, Elena Chun, had earned every dollar of it through double shifts at Millfield General Hospital, where she cleaned rooms and emptied trash bins while families slept peacefully in beds she would never be able to afford. The scholarship that had brought Maya to Riverside Prep was her family's ticket to a better future, but it came with invisible chains. One disciplinary incident, one grade below B-, one step out of line, and she would lose everything they had sacrificed to achieve. The pressure was suffocating, but Maya had learned to carry it silently, just like everything else in her life. Riverside Preparatory Academy occupied 40 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, with buildings that looked more like a colonial mansion than a school. Students here were the children of senators, CEOs, and old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. The annual tuition exceeded what most families earned in a year, and the waiting list stretched for decades. For Maya, walking these halls felt like trespassing in a world that would never truly accept her presence. The social hierarchy at Riverside was as rigid and unforgiving as anything found in nature. At the top sat the legacy students whose great-grandparents had attended the same institution and whose family donations funded new facilities. Below them came the wealthy newcomers, tech entrepreneurs, and investment bankers who had bought their way into the exclusive community. Maya occupied the lowest rung, a scholarship recipient whose presence was tolerated but never welcomed. Madison Pierce emerged from the girls' restroom like a queen holding court, her platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves that probably cost more than Maya's monthly grocery budget. At 18, Madison possessed the kind of effortless beauty and confidence that came from never having to worry about money, never having to work for anything, never having to question whether she deserved her place in the world. Her father, Judge Richard Pierce, sat on the Connecticut Supreme Court, and her mother chaired the board of 3 different charities while managing the family's extensive real estate portfolio. Behind Madison walked her faithful lieutenants, Ashley Brooks and Taylor West, both equally polished and equally cruel in their own unique ways. Ashley was built like an athlete, with the kind of aggressive energy that suggested she enjoyed physical confrontation. Her red hair was always immaculately styled, and her green eyes held a cold intelligence that Maya found more unsettling than Madison's obvious cruelty. Taylor was smaller but no less dangerous, with brown hair and a deceptively sweet smile that masked a talent for psychological warfare that would impress military strategists. Together, they called themselves the Riverside Royalty, though Maya privately thought of them as predators who had grown bored with easy prey and were always searching for new sources of entertainment. They moved through the school with the kind of immunity that money and connections provided, untouchable and unaccountable for their actions. Well, Madison's voice carried that particular tone of mock sweetness that made Maya's stomach clench with dread. "If it isn't our little charity case, how are things in the servant quarters today, Maya? Did your mother finish mopping all the hospital floors, or does she have another shift cleaning up after her betters?" Maya kept walking, hoping that ignoring them would make them lose interest and find easier targets. She had learned that engaging with Madison only provided more ammunition for future attacks. Her mother had taught her that dignity meant holding your head high even when others tried to tear you down. But maintaining dignity became harder every day at Riverside Prep. Ashley stepped into Maya's path, blocking her route to the safety of her first period classroom. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, more confined, as other students hurried past with their eyes carefully averted. Everyone at Riverside knew the unspoken rule about Madison Pierce and her crew. You didn't interfere with their entertainment unless you wanted to become the next target, and nobody had the courage or stupidity to challenge the most powerful students in school. "I asked you a question, scholarship girl," Madison continued, her voice rising just enough to ensure that nearby students could hear every word. "It's rude to ignore people who are trying to have a conversation with you. Didn't your mother teach you any manners, or was she too busy scrubbing toilets to worry about raising a proper daughter?" Maya's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to speak quietly and respectfully. "I'm sorry if I seemed rude. I was just trying to get to class on time." She clutched her textbook tighter, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes watching the confrontation unfold. Phones were already being discreetly pulled from pockets, ready to capture whatever happened next for social media distribution. Madison's laugh was sharp and crystalline, like expensive champagne glasses breaking against marble. "Sorry? Oh, that's precious. You're sorry for being rude. But what about being sorry for taking up space that belongs to students who actually deserve to be here?" Her voice carried that particular brand of cruelty that came from years of practice, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum psychological damage. This wasn't the first time Madison had cornered Maya in the hallways of Riverside Prep. The harassment had started subtly during Maya's first week at the prestigious academy, beginning with small slights and passive-aggressive comments that could be dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. A shoulder bump in the crowded cafeteria that sent Maya's lunch tray clattering to the floor. Whispered comments about scholarship students not belonging in advanced placement classes. Deliberate exclusion from group projects that left Maya scrambling to find partners willing to work with the outsider. But as Madison realized that Maya wouldn't fight back, wouldn't report the incidents, and wouldn't risk her precious scholarship by causing trouble, the attacks had escalated. What began as social exclusion evolved into active psychological warfare designed to break Maya's spirit and force her to leave Riverside Prep voluntarily. Madison had turned Maya's presence at the school into a daily humiliation ritual that provided entertainment for her followers and served as a warning to other students about the consequences of not knowing their place. The morning interrogations had become routine. Madison would find Maya at her locker, in the library, or walking between classes, always with an audience of students pretending not to watch while recording everything on their phones. The questions were always designed to highlight Maya's poverty, her mother's working-class job, and her status as an unwelcome intruder in their exclusive world. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya had learned to endure these encounters with practiced silence, knowing that any response would only provide Madison with more material for future attacks. Her scholarship depended on maintaining perfect grades and pristine behavior. 1. Complaint from a student like Madison Pierce, whose father had donated the money for the school's new library wing, could result in Maya's immediate expulsion and the destruction of her family's dreams. "I really need to get to chemistry class," Maya said softly, trying to step around Ashley's imposing frame. "Professor Williams doesn't accept tardiness, and I can't afford to lose points on my participation grade." The admission of academic vulnerability was strategic, a reminder that she had more to lose than they did, hoping it might generate enough sympathy to end the confrontation. Ashley's smile was predatory and cold. "Participation grade? How adorable. Tell me, scholarship girl, what happens? If you lose that precious 4.0 average, do you get sent back to whatever public school wasteland you crawled out of? Do you end up flipping burgers next to your toilet-scrubbing mother?" The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully aimed at Maya's deepest insecurities and fears. Her mother's job at the hospital was honest work, demanding work that required skill and dedication, but Madison and her friends made it sound degrading and shameful. Elena Chun worked 16-hour shifts to provide for her daughter, sacrificing her own comfort and health to give Maya opportunities she had never had herself. Maya's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she forced herself to remain calm and submissive. Getting angry would only make things worse, and she couldn't afford to give Madison any excuse to escalate the situation further. Instead, she took a deep breath and tried to project the kind of humble gratitude that might satisfy Madison's need for dominance. "You're right," Maya said quietly, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "I'm very fortunate to be here, and I don't want to waste the opportunity. I'll try to be more respectful in the future." The admission of fault was a strategic surrender, designed to feed Madison's ego and hopefully bring the morning's entertainment to a conclusion. Madison studied Maya's face with the intensity of a scientist examining an interesting specimen. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps disappointment that her victim had capitulated so easily. The thrill of the hunt was always diminished when the prey submitted without a proper fight. "That's better," Madison said finally, her voice carrying the tone of a teacher addressing a slow student. "Now I think you owe us an apology for being disrespectful. A proper apology, on your knees, so everyone can see how sorry you really are." Her words carried the weight of absolute authority, the confidence of someone who had never been told no. In her entire privileged life, Maya felt her chest tighten with humiliation and rage, but she couldn't afford to refuse. Too many students were watching, too many phones were recording, and too much was at stake. Her scholarship, her future, her mother's sacrifices, all of it balanced on the razor's edge of Madison's whims and the arbitrary cruelty of teenage social dynamics. But as Maya began to lower herself toward the cold marble floor, something stirred. Deep in her memory, the smell of chlorine and the echo of a whistle cutting through humid air. The feeling of powerful muscles propelling her through water with the grace and speed of a natural predator. The weight of gold medals hanging around her neck while crowds cheered from packed bleachers. Before the financial crisis that had destroyed her family's middle-class stability, before her father's construction business had collapsed under the weight of bad contracts and economic recession, before they had lost their house and been forced to move into a cramped apartment in Millfield's roughest neighborhood, Maya Chen had been somebody completely different. She had been a competitive swimmer, one of the most promising young athletes in the state of Connecticut. From the age of 6, she had spent every morning and afternoon in the pool at the Millfield Aquatic Center, her small body cutting through the water with technical precision that amazed coaches and terrified competitors. By age 14, She held 3 state records in freestyle events and had been recruited by college programs across the country. Swimming had been more than just a sport for Maya. It had been her identity, her passion, her pathway to a future filled with possibilities. In the water, she wasn't the shy, quiet girl who struggled with social situations and preferred books to parties. In the water, she was a force of nature, a predator perfectly adapted to her environment, capable of moving with speed and power that seemed impossible for someone her size. Her coach, Maria Santos, had been a former Olympic competitor who recognized Maya's exceptional talent and dedicated herself to developing it. Under Maria's guidance, Maya had learned not just the technical aspects of competitive swimming, but the mental discipline required to push through pain and exhaustion when victory demanded everything she had to give. Swimming is about more than speed, Maria had told her during one of their final training sessions before everything fell apart. It's about understanding your environment, using the water instead of fighting against it. The strongest swimmers aren't always the biggest or the most powerful. They're the ones who know how to use leverage and technique to generate maximum force with minimum effort. Those lessons had extended far beyond the pool. Maya had learned to read water conditions instinctively, to understand currents and resistance, and how to position her body for optimal performance. She had developed the kind of spatial awareness and physical coordination that came from years of training at the highest levels of competitive athletics. More importantly, she had learned what it felt like to be dangerous. When Maya was 15, she had been recruited by Stanford University's swimming program, one of only 3 sophomores in the country to receive such an early offer. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a courier to their comfortable suburban home where Maya's father ran his successful construction company and her mother worked part-time as a dental hygienist. The family had celebrated that night with takeout from Maya's favorite Chinese restaurant, making plans for campus visits and discussing the full-ride scholarship that would change their lives forever. 6 months later, everything had disappeared like water draining from a broken pool. Her father's business partner had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars before fleeing to Mexico, leaving behind a trail of unpaid contractors, angry clients, and legal liabilities that destroyed the company overnight. The lawsuits came first, then the foreclosure notices, then the bankruptcy proceedings that stripped away everything Maya's family had built over 2 decades of hard work and careful planning. The Millfield Aquatic Center required monthly membership, fees that suddenly became impossible to afford. Maya's private coaching sessions with Maria Santos, which had cost $200 per week, became an unthinkable luxury when the family was struggling to buy groceries. The specialized training equipment, the competition travel expenses, the nutritional supplements that had supported Maya's athletic development, all of it vanished as quickly as their financial security. Maya remembered the last conversation she'd had with Coach Santos, sitting in the empty pool facility after all the other swimmers had gone home. Maria had tried to find alternative funding, had contacted sponsors and athletic foundations, had even offered to train Maya for free. But without access to proper facilities, without the ability to travel to competitions, without the support structure that elite athletic development required, Maya's swimming career had simply withered away like a plant denied sunlight and water. The hardest part hadn't been losing the scholarships or the medals or even the Olympic dreams that had seemed so achievable just months before. The hardest part had been losing the person she had been in the water, the confident predator who moved through her natural element with deadly grace and precision. On land, Maya was awkward and uncertain, but in the water, she had been transformed into something powerful and magnificent. Maria Santos had given her one final piece of advice during that goodbye conversation, words that had echoed in Maya's mind ever since. Your technique doesn't disappear just because you're not competing anymore. Your strength doesn't vanish because you're not training every day. What you learned in this pool, what you became here, that's part of you forever. But you have to be careful how you use it, because people who haven't earned that kind of power through sacrifice and discipline, they don't understand what it means. Maya had promised herself that day that she would never use her swimming abilities to hurt anyone, never take advantage of skills that others couldn't possibly understand or defend against. The water had taught her respect for power, respect for the damage that could be done when strength was used carelessly or cruelly. She would keep her abilities hidden, locked away like a dangerous secret, used only for personal exercise in the public pool where she could afford occasional visits. But standing here in the marble hallway of Riverside Preparatory Academy, listening to Madison Pierce demand that she kneel in front of an audience of her peers, Maya felt that promise beginning to crack under the weight of accumulated humiliation and rage. Her mother's sacrifices, her own academic achievements, her carefully maintained dignity, all of it meant nothing to people like Madison, who had never worked for anything in their entire privileged lives. Maya slowly straightened up from her partial crouch, her decision made in the span of a heartbeat. "I'm not going to kneel," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby students look up from their phones in surprise. "I haven't done anything wrong, and I won't humiliate myself for your entertainment anymore." Madison's eyes widened with what might have been genuine shock. It was probably the first time in her life that someone had refused her direct command, the first time her absolute authority had been challenged by someone she considered beneath her notice. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with potential energy that could explode in any direction. "Excuse me?" Madison's voice rose an octave, attracting more attention from students who had been trying to mind their own business. "Did you just tell me no? Do you have any idea who you're talking to, scholarship girl? Do you understand what happens to people who disrespect me in my own school?" Maya stood her ground, though her heart was racing with adrenaline and fear. She could feel the weight of every stare, every phone camera, every whispered comment that would follow her through the school for weeks to come. But she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and there was no going back to the safety of submission and silence. The confrontation marked a turning point in Madison's campaign against Maya, transforming what had been casual cruelty into something much more systematic and dangerous. Madison Pierce was not accustomed to defiance, and Maya's refusal to kneel had been a public humiliation that demanded immediate and overwhelming retaliation. The war that followed would make their previous encounters look like gentle teasing by comparison. Over the next 2 weeks, Madison unleashed the full power of her social network against Maya with military precision and ruthless efficiency. Rumors began spreading through the school like wildfire, each one more damaging than the last. Maya was accused of cheating on her entrance exams, of bribing administrators for her scholarship, of stealing from other students' lockers. The lies were so outrageous that they should have been immediately dismissed, but repetition gave them weight and credibility among students who wanted to believe the worst about the outsider in their midst. Maya's locker was vandalized repeatedly, despite the security cameras that supposedly monitored the hallways. Someone had obtained her combination and filled her space with garbage, rotting food, and printed photographs of her mother cleaning. Hospital rooms with cruel captions written in permanent marker. The school's administration promised to investigate, but the vandalism always happened during periods when the cameras mysteriously malfunctioned or were blocked by conveniently placed backpacks. The psychological warfare extended into the digital realm as well. Fake social media accounts were created in Maya's name, posting embarrassing content and inappropriate comments that were screenshot and shared throughout the school. Her homework assignments were stolen from her bag and submitted under other students' names, leaving Maya to face accusations of plagiarism when she couldn't prove the work was originally hers. The academic sabotage was particularly devastating because it threatened the foundation of Maya's entire presence at Riverside Prep. Her scholarship required maintaining a grade point average above 3.8, and any disciplinary action for academic dishonesty would result in immediate expulsion. Madison had found the perfect weapon to destroy Maya without leaving fingerprints, using the school's own policies as a sword to cut down her enemy. The isolation became total as other. Students learned to avoid Maya entirely rather than risk becoming collateral damage in Madison's war. Teachers who had previously been supportive began treating her with suspicion and distance, influenced by the constant stream of rumors and manufactured evidence of misconduct. Even David Martinez, the quiet boy who had occasionally shared a lunch table with Maya, stopped making eye contact when they passed in the hallways. Maya's grades began to slip as the stress and constant vigilance required to navigate Madison's attacks consumed her mental energy. She found herself checking over her shoulder constantly, never knowing when the next humiliation would come or what form it would take. Sleep became elusive as anxiety kept her awake at night, running through scenarios and trying to anticipate Madison's next move in their deadly game. The physical toll was equally severe. Maya lost weight as stress killed her appetite, and the constant fear made eating difficult. Dark circles under her eyes deepened as insomnia became chronic, and her clothes hung even more loosely on her shrinking frame. Her mother noticed the changes, but Maya deflected every question with practiced lies about academic pressure and adjustment difficulties. Alina Chen was fighting her own battles at the hospital, working double shifts to make ends meet and dealing with her own form of workplace harassment from colleagues who resented her daughter's presence at the prestigious academy. Maya couldn't bear to add her problems to her mother's already overwhelming burden, so she suffered in silence while the walls closed in around her from every direction. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday morning in November when Maya discovered that someone had accessed her school email account and sent inappropriate messages to several teachers, including crude comments about their appearance and suggestions for improving her grades through non-academic means. The messages were clearly fabricated, but they appeared to come from Maya's official school account and contained enough personal details to seem authentic. Maya was called to the principal's office that afternoon to face accusations that could end her academic career before it had truly begun. Principal Harrison's office felt like a courtroom where Maya had already been convicted before the trial began. The distinguished administrator sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by diplomas and photographs that chronicled decades of service to Riverside Preparatory, Academy's most influential families. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored, and his expression carried the weight of disappointment that felt more devastating than outright anger. Across from him sat Maya, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling, while her academic advisor, Mrs. Peterson, reviewed printed copies of the fabricated emails with growing concern. The messages were damning in their apparent authenticity, filled with specific details about classroom interactions and teacher mannerisms that suggested intimate familiarity with the school environment. "Miss Chun," Principal Harrison began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering life-altering judgments. "These communications allegedly sent from your school account represent a serious breach of our honor code and potentially constitute sexual harassment of faculty members. I'm sure you understand the gravity of these accusations and the potential consequences for your continued enrollment at this institution." Maya felt her carefully constructed world crashing down around her like a building collapsing in slow motion. Every word from the principal's mouth seemed to echo from a great distance, filtered through the rushing sound of blood pumping through her ears. Her scholarship, her future, her mother's sacrifices, everything balanced on the edge of a precipice that Madison Pierce had engineered with diabolical precision. "I didn't send those emails," Maya said quietly, her voice barely audible in the spacious office. "Someone must have gained access to my account and sent them to frame me. I would never write anything like that about my teachers or anyone else." The words sounded weak and desperate even to her own ears, The predictable protest of someone caught red-handed and scrambling for excuses. Mrs. Peterson looked up from the printed emails with genuine sadness in her eyes. Maya, the technical analysis shows these messages originated from your account during times when you were logged into the school network. The language patterns match writing samples from your previous assignments, and several references suggest intimate knowledge of classroom dynamics that would be difficult for an outsider to fabricate. The evidence was overwhelming and thoroughly convincing, a masterpiece of digital manipulation that demonstrated Madison's resources and sophistication. Maya realized that she was fighting an opponent who possessed advantages she had never fully comprehended, someone with access to technical expertise and financial resources that could manufacture reality itself. Furthermore, Principal Harrison continued, "We've received reports from several students about inappropriate behavior and aggressive confrontations in the hallways. There are concerns that you may be struggling with the social adjustment required for success at Riverside Preparatory Academy." He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening with what might have been genuine concern. "Maya, I want to help you succeed here, but I need to understand what's really happening." Maya felt tears threatening behind her eyes, but refused to give Madison the satisfaction of seeing her cry, even indirectly through the principal's report. The suggestion that she was the aggressor in the hallway confrontations was so twisted and backwards that it would have been laughable if the consequences weren't so severe. Madison had successfully portrayed herself as the victim, while simultaneously destroying Maya's reputation with surgical precision. "I'm not struggling with social adjustment," Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady and professional. "I'm being systematically harassed by Madison Pierce and her friends, and now they're trying to get me expelled by framing me for things I didn't do. Everything you've heard about aggressive confrontations is backwards. I'm the one being targeted, not the other way around." Principal Harrison exchanged a meaningful glance with Mrs. Peterson, a silent communication that suggested they had anticipated this response. Madison Pierce's family had been associated with Riverside Preparatory Academy for 3 generations, contributing millions of dollars to building improvements and scholarship funds. Her father served on the board of trustees, and her mother chaired the annual fundraising gala that kept the school's endowment healthy and growing. Maya, on the other hand, was a scholarship student whose presence at the academy was conditional and temporary, dependent on maintaining perfect grades and pristine behavior. In the brutal mathematics of institutional politics, there was no contest between a Pierce family legacy and a working-class transfer student with no connections or influence. "Maya," Mrs. Peterson said gently, "we take all allegations of harassment seriously, and we've investigated the concerns you've raised previously. However, we haven't found evidence to support claims of systematic targeting by Madison or any other student. The incidents you've reported appear to be normal social friction that occurs when students from different backgrounds interact in close quarters." The dismissal was polite but final, wrapped in administrative language that suggested Maya was either lying or failing to understand normal social dynamics. The message was clear. Her word held no weight against Madison Pierce's reputation and family connections. Justice at Riverside Preparatory Academy was not blind, and the scales were permanently tilted toward wealth and influence. Under normal circumstances, Principal Harrison continued, "These email violations would result in immediate suspension, pending a disciplinary hearing that could lead to permanent expulsion. However, given your academic achievements and scholarship status, I'm willing to offer you an alternative resolution. You can transfer back to the public school system voluntarily, maintaining your academic record without the stigma of disciplinary action." The offer was presented as mercy, but Maya recognized it for what it really was, a face-saving exit strategy that would remove the problem without creating controversy or negative publicity for the school. Madison would achieve her ultimate goal of driving Maya away from Riverside Prep while the administration could claim they had handled the situation with compassion and fairness. Maya stared at the principal's expectant face, understanding that this moment represented the culmination of everything Madison had worked toward since their first confrontation in the hallway. The systematic harassment, the academic sabotage, the social isolation, all of it had been designed to reach exactly this point where Maya would be forced to choose between voluntary exile and outright expulsion. "I need time to think about it," Maya said finally, knowing that any other response would be interpreted as either guilt or defiance. "Can I have until tomorrow to discuss this with my mother and make a decision?" The request bought her precious hours to process what had happened and figure out if there was any way to salvage the situation. Principal Harrison nodded with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully resolved a delicate political problem. "Of course, Maya. Take the evening to consider your options and discuss them with your family. We'll expect your decision first thing tomorrow morning. Until then, you're suspended from classes pending resolution of this matter." Maya walked out of the administrative office feeling like a condemned prisoner who had been granted a temporary reprieve before execution. The hallways of Riverside Preparatory Academy stretched before her like a gauntlet of whispered conversations and knowing looks from students who had undoubtedly heard about her meeting with the principal through the school's efficient gossip network. She made it to her locker without incident, mechanically gathering her textbooks and personal belongings, while trying to process the complete destruction of everything she had worked to achieve. The framed photograph of her and her mother at Maya's 8th grade graduation seemed to mock her from inside the metal compartment, a reminder of dreams and aspirations that now lay in ruins at Madison Pierce's feet. The afternoon rain had intensified, while Maya was trapped in the principal's office, turning the campus pathways into treacherous streams that reflected the gray November sky. She pulled her thin jacket closer against the cold and began the long walk toward the bus stop that would take her back to the cramped apartment, where she would have to explain to her mother why their dreams were ending in failure and humiliation. But as Maya passed the girls' restroom on the 2nd floor of the academic building, she heard voices that made her blood freeze in her veins. Madison's distinctive laugh echoed off the marble tiles, accompanied by Ashley's aggressive tone and Taylor's cool giggling. They were celebrating their victory, reliving the triumph of their perfectly executed plan to destroy the scholarship student who had dared to challenge their authority. "Did you see her face when Harrison told her about the emails?" Madison's voice carried the satisfaction of a predator who had successfully cornered her prey. "I thought she was going to cry right there in his office." Ashley's technical skills with the computer hacking were absolutely perfect. Nobody will ever be able to prove those messages didn't come from her account. Maya pressed herself against the wall outside the restroom door, hidden from view but close enough to hear every word of their conversation. The confirmation of what she had suspected was both vindicating and devastating, proof that her accusations had been accurate, but also evidence that would never be believed by administrators who had already chosen their side in the conflict. Taylor's voice joined the celebration with characteristic malice. "The best part is that she actually thinks she can transfer back to public school and start over somewhere else. What she doesn't realize is that we're going to make sure this follows her wherever she goes. A few phone calls to the right people, and she'd be radioactive at any school in the state." Maya felt something cold and deadly settle in her chest as she listened to them plan the complete destruction of her future. This wasn't just about forcing her out of Riverside Preparatory Academy anymore. Madison intended to ensure that Maya could never escape the consequences of defying her authority, that the punishment would follow her for years to come, like a scarlet letter marking her as unworthy of educational opportunities. The conversation inside the restroom continued with increasing cruelty as the 3 girls detailed their plans for systematic character assassination that would extend far beyond the walls of their elite academy. They discussed contacting college admissions offices, spreading rumors to potential employers, and using their family's extensive networks to ensure that Maya's defiance would haunt her for decades. Maya realized in that moment that running away would never be enough to escape Madison's vengeance. The only way this would ever end was if someone finally stood up to the predators, who had been allowed to operate with impunity for too long. The quiet girl who had tried to survive through submission and invisibility was about to discover what happened when someone finally pushed her past the point of no return. Maya stood frozen outside the bathroom door, listening to Madison's cruel laughter echo off the marble tiles as the three girls continued planning her complete social destruction. But their conversation took an even darker turn as Ashley's voice cut through the celebration with a new suggestion that made Maya's blood run cold. "You know what would be even better than just getting her expelled," Ashley said, her tone carrying the kind of casual malice that suggested she had given this considerable thought. "We should give her a proper goodbye lesson before she leaves. Something she'll remember forever. Something that will teach her what happens when charity cases try to act like they belong with their betters." Madison's interest was immediately piqued, her voice taking on the excited edge of someone contemplating a new form of entertainment. "What did you have in mind? We need to be careful not to leave any marks or evidence that could come back to haunt us later. But I like the way you're thinking, Ashley. Our little scholarship girl needs to understand that there are consequences for disrespecting people like us." Taylor's giggle carried a disturbing note of anticipation as she joined the planning session. "Remember how terrified she looked when Tommy accidentally splashed her with that water bottle last week? I swear she almost had a panic attack just from getting a little wet. Maybe we could arrange a more thorough soaking, really help her understand what drowning in debt feels like by giving her a preview of actual drowning." Maya's hands began trembling as she realized the direction their conversation was heading. The casual way they discussed inflicting serious harm revealed a level of sociopathy that went far beyond typical teenage cruelty. These weren't just privileged bullies anymore. They were dangerous predators who had escalated from psychological warfare to planning physical assault with the same casual indifference they might show when choosing lunch options. Ashley's voice became more animated as she outlined her vision for Maya's final humiliation. "The second-floor bathroom has those big Victorian sinks with the deep basins and powerful faucets. If we caught her alone in there, we could easily hold her head under the water for a while, give her a taste of what real powerlessness feels like. Nothing permanent, obviously, just enough to make sure she never forgets her place in the natural order." The calculating tone in Ashley's voice suggested this wasn't a spontaneous idea born from momentary anger. She had clearly given considerable thought to the logistics of assault, studying the bathroom facilities and planning the attack with methodical precision. Maya realized that her tormentors had crossed the line from harassment into premeditated violence, and their wealth and connections would likely protect them from serious consequences, even if they seriously injured her. Madison's approval was immediate and enthusiastic. "That's brilliant, Ashley. And the beauty of it is that if she tries to report us afterward, who's going to believe the scholarship girl who's already been caught sending inappropriate emails to teachers? We'll just say she slipped and fell while trying to clean up after vandalizing school property. Our word against hers, and we all know whose testimony carries more weight around here." Maya felt her world narrowing to a single point of crystalline clarity as she listened to them plan her assault with the casual efficiency of military strategists. The realization that they intended to hold her head underwater in the bathroom sink triggered something primal and dangerous in her memory, awakening instincts that had been dormant for years but never truly forgotten. In the competitive swimming world, Maya had trained extensively in breath control and underwater survival techniques. She had spent countless hours practicing in oxygen deprivation scenarios, learning to maintain consciousness and physical coordination even when her body was screaming for air. Her lung capacity and underwater endurance had been legendary among her teammates, allowing her to stay submerged for periods that amazed even experienced coaches. More importantly, Maya understood water dynamics and body positioning in ways that her attackers couldn't possibly comprehend. She knew how to use water resistance as leverage, how to generate devastating force from minimal movement, and how to turn an opponent's size and strength against them in an aquatic environment. The very element they planned to use as a weapon would become her domain of absolute advantage. But there was something else stirring in Maya's chest as she processed their plans, something beyond tactical calculations and competitive reflexes. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Preparatory Academy, she felt the return of her true self, the predator who had dominated every pool she had ever entered. The quiet, submissive scholarship student was dissolving like salt in water, replaced by someone far more dangerous than Madison Pierce could possibly imagine. The bathroom door opened suddenly, interrupting Maya's eavesdropping as David Martinez emerged looking pale and shaken. He had obviously heard at least part of the conversation from inside one of the stalls, and his expression carried the same horrified disbelief that Maya was feeling. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw both fear and determination flickering in his gaze. "Maya," he whispered urgently, keeping his voice low enough to avoid detection by Madison's group. "You need to get out of here right now. They're planning something terrible, and you can't be anywhere near this bathroom when they decide to act on it." His warning carried genuine concern, but also the helpless frustration of someone who wanted to intervene but lacked the physical capability to stand against three athletic teenagers with a taste for violence. David Martinez had been one of the few students at Riverside Prep who had shown Maya any kindness since her arrival at the academy. He was a quiet, scholarly boy whose family had earned their wealth through innovative medical device patents rather than inherited privilege. Like Maya, he existed somewhat outside the established social hierarchy. Though his family's money provided him with protection that her scholarship status couldn't match. "I can't keep running from them," Maya replied softly, her voice carrying a new edge that made David look at her with surprise. "They're not going to stop until they destroy everything I've worked for, and now they're planning to physically hurt me. Someone has to make them understand that their actions have consequences, that they can't just keep terrorizing people because their parents have money and influence." David's expression shifted from concern to alarm as he recognized the change in Maya's demeanor. She was standing differently now, her posture suggesting coiled potential energy rather than defensive submission. There was something in her eyes that he had never seen before, a cold calculation that reminded him of documentaries about apex predators studying their prey before striking. "Maya, you can't fight them," David said desperately. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But Madison's father is a state judge, and Ashley's family owns half the construction companies in Connecticut. If you lay a hand on any of them, they'll have you arrested and expelled before sunset. There has to be another way to handle this situation." But Maya was no longer listening to his reasonable arguments and logical warnings. She was calculating angles and distances, studying the bathroom layout through the partially open door, and planning her response to an attack that she now knew was inevitable. Her tormentors had escalated beyond psychological warfare into the realm of physical violence, and Maya Chen was finally ready to show them what happened when predators encountered an apex predator disguised as prey. The bathroom door swung open again as Taylor emerged, her face flushed with excitement and malicious anticipation. She spotted Maya and David immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to predatory satisfaction as she realized their target had delivered herself directly into their hands. Well, Taylor called back into the bathroom, her voice carrying theatrical delight. "Look what we have here." Our little scholarship girl was apparently eavesdropping on private conversations. "That's very rude behavior, Maya. I think you owe us an apology for invading our privacy like that." Madison and Ashley appeared in the doorway behind Taylor, their faces reflecting various degrees of anticipation and cruel satisfaction. Maya realized that her presence outside the bathroom had been discovered at exactly the wrong moment, when their plans for violence were fresh in their minds and their inhibitions had been lowered by the excitement of collaborative cruelty. David stepped protectively in front of Maya, his slight frame creating a barrier between her and the three larger girls. "This has gone far enough," he said with more courage than his trembling voice suggested. "Whatever issues you have with Maya can be resolved through proper channels. There's no need for any of this to escalate further than it already has." Ashley's laugh was sharp and dismissive as she looked David up and down with obvious contempt. "Oh, how sweet. The scholarship girl has found herself a little boyfriend. Tell me, David, does your daddy's medical money make you think you can interfere with business that doesn't concern you? Maybe you need a lesson in social hierarchy, right? Alongside your charity case girlfriend." Madison stepped forward with the predatory grace of someone who had never doubted her ability to dominate any situation through sheer force of will and social position. "Actually, this works out perfectly. We were just discussing the need to give Maya a proper farewell experience before she transfers back to whatever public school wasteland will take her. Now we have an audience to witness her final lesson in respect and humility." The hallway around them had emptied as other students sensed the dangerous tension and found urgent reasons to be elsewhere. Maya realized that no help would be coming from teachers or administrators who were safely ensconced in their offices, unaware that their students were about to cross the line from harassment into assault. She and David were completely alone with three predators who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy lives for entertainment. Maya gently moved David aside, her touch surprisingly strong and confident. "Thank you for trying to help," she said quietly, her voice carrying a strange calm that seemed out of place given the circumstances. "But this is something I need to handle myself. These three have been terrorizing students for years, and it's time someone taught them that actions have consequences." Something in Maya's tone made Madison pause, uncertainty flickering across her features for the first time in their long conflict. The scholarship student was acting differently, speaking with an authority and confidence that seemed completely at odds with her previous submissive behavior. There was something predatory in her stillness, something dangerous in the way she held herself perfectly balanced and ready for movement. But Ashley was too excited by the prospect of violence to notice the warning signs that Madison's more sophisticated social instincts were beginning to detect. "Come on," she said impatiently, grabbing Maya's arm with unnecessary force. "Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private, where we won't be interrupted by any bleeding heart administrators who might misunderstand our educational intentions." Maya allowed herself to be pulled into the marble-tiled bathroom, followed by Madison and Taylor while David hesitated in the doorway, clearly torn between his desire to help and his realistic assessment of his physical limitations. The bathroom was spacious and elegantly appointed, with Victorian-era fixtures that reflected Riverside Prep's commitment to maintaining historical authenticity in their architectural details. The sinks were indeed large and deep, with powerful faucets that could generate impressive water pressure when fully opened. Maya noted the spatial dimensions automatically, her swimmer's instincts cataloging the available room for movement and the positioning of potential obstacles or advantages. The marble floors would be slippery when wet. The mirrors could be used to track movement behind her, and the heavy wooden stall doors could provide leverage for defensive maneuvers. Ashley positioned herself between Maya and the exit while Madison approached the nearest sink and began running the cold water at maximum pressure. The sound echoed off the hard surfaces, creating an ominous soundtrack for what was clearly intended to be Maya's final humiliation at Riverside Preparatory Academy. "You know, Maya," Madison said conversationally as she tested the water temperature with her manicured fingers, "I've been thinking about our relationship over these past few months. I realize now that I may have been too gentle in helping you understand your proper place in our school's social ecosystem. Sometimes kindness can be misinterpreted as weakness, and clearly you've developed some unfortunate misconceptions about your status here." Taylor giggled as she moved to Maya's other side, creating a triangle of potential attackers around their intended victim. "Madison's right, you know. We've been way too patient with your attitude problems and your failure to show proper gratitude for the opportunity you've been given. I think a more direct educational approach is needed to help you understand the natural order of things." Maya stood perfectly still in the center of their formation, her breathing slow and controlled as she prepared for what was coming. She could feel the familiar pre-competition calm settling over her, the state of heightened awareness and physical readiness that had served her so well during her years of competitive swimming. Her heart rate slowed rather than accelerated, her muscles relaxed into optimal positioning for explosive movement, and her mind cleared of everything except tactical calculations. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. Madison and her crew had chosen to attack her using water, the very element where Maya possessed advantages that bordered on superhuman. They were planning to hold her head under the sink faucet, apparently unaware that she could hold her breath longer than any of them could maintain the physical effort required to keep her submerged. They intended to use their size and strength against her in an environment where technique and water sense mattered more than raw power. Madison's voice took on the ceremonial tone of someone conducting a ritual sacrifice as she gestured toward the running sink. "Now, Maya, I want you to walk over here slowly and put your hands on the edge of the basin. We're going to give you a thorough washing to help clean away some of that disrespectful attitude you've been carrying around. Consider it a baptism of sorts, a symbolic cleansing before you leave our school forever." Maya began walking toward the sink with apparent compliance, her movements fluid and graceful despite the tension crackling through the air. Ashley and Taylor flanked her closely, their hands ready to grab her if she tried to run or resist. David remained frozen in the doorway, his face pale with horror as he witnessed the prelude to an assault that could seriously injure or even kill the girl he had tried to protect. But as Maya reached the sink, instead of placing her hands on the basin edge as instructed, she suddenly spun with lightning speed and precision. Her right hand struck Ashley's solar plexus with surgical accuracy, a technique she had learned from her swimming coach for generating maximum force from minimal movement. Ashley folded in half with a shocked gasp, her aggressive posture crumbling, as her diaphragm spasmed and her breathing became labored. Before Taylor could react to her friend's collapse, Maya had already shifted into a fluid crouch and swept the smaller girl's legs with a move that would have been perfectly legal in a pool-based water polo match. Taylor crashed to the marble floor with a surprised yelp, her head narrowly missing the edge of a sink basin as she tumbled backward into an undignified heap. Madison lunged forward with a wild swing that telegraphed itself from several feet away, her privileged upbringing having provided no training in actual physical confrontation. Maya slipped the punch with the effortless grace of someone who had spent years dodging much faster and more coordinated opponents in the water, then grabbed Madison's extended wrist and used the momentum to redirect her straight into the sink basin that had been intended for Maya's drowning. Madison's face plunged into the running water with a spectacular splash that soaked the front of her designer uniform and sent her carefully styled hair into complete disarray. Maya held her there for exactly 10 seconds, long enough to demonstrate complete physical dominance, but not long enough to cause serious harm. When she finally released Madison's wrist, the queen of Riverside Prep emerged from the sink, sputtering and gasping, her makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks and her authority shattered as completely as her appearance. Ashley was still struggling to breathe normally, bent over with her hands pressed against her stomach while she fought to regain control of her diaphragm. Taylor had managed to sit up on the wet marble floor, but seemed disoriented and reluctant to stand her Confidence evaporated along with her aggressive posture. David stared from the doorway with his mouth hanging open, trying to process the complete reversal of power dynamics that had occurred in less than 30 seconds. Maya stood in the center of the bathroom, barely breathing hard despite having simultaneously defeated 3 opponents who had significant size and numerical advantages. Her clothes were still dry, her hair remained perfectly arranged, and her expression carried the calm satisfaction of someone who had finally revealed their true capabilities to people who had seriously underestimated them. "Now," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that filled the marble-tiled space like water rising in a pool, "let me explain how things are going to work from this point forward. You 3 are going to stop harassing students immediately, not just me, but everyone. You've been terrorizing for years. You're going to confess to Principal Harrison that you fabricated those emails and hacked my account, and you're going to recommend that my scholarship be continued without any disciplinary action." Madison struggled to speak through her waterlogged throat, her voice coming out as a pathetic croak that bore no resemblance to her previous commanding tone. "You can't make us do anything. Our families have connections and influence that you'll never understand. One phone call from my father, and you'll be expelled and arrested for assault before the end of the day." Maya crouched down so she was at eye level with Madison, who was still leaning against the sink basin for support. The movement was fluid and predatory, suggesting reserves of physical capability that hadn't even been tapped during their brief confrontation. "Let me help you understand something about connections and influence," she said calmly. "David's father holds patents on medical devices used in every major hospital in the state. His family's lawyers are very good at handling harassment and assault cases, especially when there's clear video evidence of the crimes being committed." She gestured toward David, who was holding up his phone with a satisfied expression that suggested he had captured the entire encounter on video. The camera had been recording from the moment the girls had forced Maya into the bathroom, documenting their stated intentions and their physical attack. More importantly, it had captured Maya's defensive response and her restraint in not seriously injuring her attackers, despite having clear opportunities to do so. Ashley had finally recovered enough to speak, though her voice was strained and uncertain. "You think one video changes anything? Our lawyers can make that disappear, and our families can make sure you never attend any decent school in the country. You have no idea what kind of power you're messing with here." Maya's smile was cold and predatory as she considered Ashley's threat. "Actually, I have a very clear idea of the power dynamics at play here. But you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about my situation. I'm not just some random scholarship student with no connections or resources. My former swimming coach, Maria Santos, is now the athletic director at Stanford University. She's been following my academic progress and waiting for me to be ready to return to competitive swimming." The revelation hit the 3 girls like a physical blow, reframing everything they thought they knew about Maya's background and prospects. Stanford University's athletic programs commanded respect and attention from college recruiters across the country, and their scholarship offers could override almost any negative academic records from high school disciplinary actions. Maya continued, her voice taking on the confident tone of someone who had finally stopped hiding their true capabilities and connections. "Maria has been documenting the harassment I've faced here through our regular communications, building a case study about the challenges scholarship athletes face when they're forced to attend schools where they're not welcome. Your systematic campaign against me has been inadvertently providing her with research material for her doctoral dissertation on institutional bias in elite educational settings." Madison's face went pale beneath her streaked makeup as she realized the implications of Maya's revelation. A Stanford University dissertation documenting harassment at Riverside Preparatory Academy would attract national attention and potentially trigger investigations by state education authorities. The school's reputation and accreditation could be seriously damaged. affecting property values throughout the community and threatening the educational investments of every wealthy family in the district. But Maya wasn't finished reshaping their understanding of the situation. She stood gracefully and moved to the bathroom door, her posture suggesting complete confidence and control over the environment that had been intended for her humiliation. "And one more thing you should probably know," she said casually, turning back to face her defeated tormentors. "The reason I've been so reluctant to fight back isn't because I'm weak or afraid. It's because I've been classified as a potential Olympic athlete, which means using my training against non-athletes could be considered assault with a deadly weapon under Connecticut state law." The silence that followed was deafening as Ashley, Taylor, and Madison processed the complete destruction of their assumptions about Maya's vulnerability and powerlessness. They had attacked someone who possessed not only superior physical capabilities, but also connections and legal protections that far exceeded their own privileged positions. David stepped aside as Maya walked out of the bathroom, his expression mixing admiration with a healthy respect for capabilities he had never suspected. The quiet scholarship student had revealed herself to be something far more dangerous and sophisticated than anyone at Riverside Preparatory Academy had imagined. And the balance of power in their elite institution had shifted permanently in the span of a single confrontation. The news of Madison Pierce's defeat spread through Riverside Prep faster than wildfire, carried by social media posts and whispered conversations that transformed Maya Chun from victim to legend within hours. Students who had previously ignored or avoided her began approaching with respect and curiosity, eager to understand how someone they had dismissed as powerless had so completely dominated the school's most feared bullies. Teachers who had been influenced by rumors and manufactured evidence began reviewing Maya's situation with fresh eyes, recognizing the systematic campaign that had been waged against her and adjusting their perceptions accordingly. Principal Harrison quietly dropped all disciplinary proceedings and recommended Maya for advanced placement in several subjects, apparently having received communications from Stanford University that reframed her value to the institution. Madison, Ashley, and Taylor found themselves occupying the social position that Maya had endured for months, whispered about and avoided by classmates who no longer viewed them as untouchable predators. Their reign of terror had ended not through administrative intervention or parental discipline, but through the emergence of someone who possessed the skills and connections to hold them accountable for their actions. Maya walked through the halls of Riverside Preparatory Academy with quiet confidence, no longer hiding her capabilities or apologizing for her presence. She wore her scholarship status with pride, ate her simple lunches without shame, and faced each day knowing that she had earned her place through merit rather than inheritance. The pool at the school's athletic facility became her regular training ground as she prepared for her return to competitive swimming under Maria Santos's guidance. The quiet girl who had once seemed like easy prey had revealed herself to be an apex predator, and Riverside Prep would never be the same. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.